many of those things apply also to handheld, right? You probably don't want a background image on a handheld device. You probably don't want. You probably want to get rid of your columns because it's probably going to be too wide. You know, if we've been designing for 800 pixels as kind of a minimum, but if you're going for the iPhone for 320 pixels, you know, you probably don't want to deal with 2, or especially if you have 3 or 4 columns. So we might want to get rid of those floats and drop them underneath. However, that gets a little bit more complex. So, for example, I'm using a Droid, which is an Android-based phone. iPhone does this too. A number of them are now saying, you know, it's a true web experience. So this is 800 pixels wide. I can run a regular website through this, and it should be fine. As a result, a lot of these are not looking for the handheld tag. A lot of them are looking and looking and using the CSS for screen because they say this is the same as this. And I'm telling you, this is not the same as this. There's a significant difference, and what might look okay on this screen may not look good on this screen. But unfortunately or fortunately, a lot of handhelds have moved to the point where they're not actually, I'll put an article up about this, where they're not actually using the screen CSS. Nonetheless, a lot of people are still using smartphones where they'd appreciate being able to go back to the handheld standard. I'll also put up something. Opera has a nice simulator, so you can run it through the simulator and see what it looks like in that. That takes us to this point, which is you really ought to be looking, once you have a site set, you really ought to be looking at it in as wide a variety of browsers and devices as you can. At a minimum, you should look at it on a Mac and a PC, although those are very quickly coming closer together. You know, 3 or 4 years ago, you'd really have, especially before Mac went into, 3 or 4 years ago, let's just say that, you really had to look, make sure that you were on multiple, at least Mac and PC, and make sure, Mac and Windows rather, and make sure that it worked in both of those platforms. Nowadays, with Safari on both, and with WebKit browsers on both, and with IE on both, you could probably get away with using only one or the other, but frankly, I wouldn't. When I'm designing a site, I always look on both Mac and PCs on the entire coterie of different browsers. What browsers do you have to check? I would say, at a minimum, you have to check Internet Explorer in every version, at least back to 6. If you're trying to design for 5.5, it's actually pretty hard. And last year I might have said you still have to do 5.5, but 6 is still very widely used. We found this out we find this out when we see various security breaches on IE6. So 6 is still surprisingly widely used. So I would say at least check in IE6 through the current version. I would check in Firefox, Opera, and Safari. At least Firefox and Safari, maybe Opera. And I think if you cover those, and again, Opera's maybe the questionable one there, you're probably good. And you should check on the major platforms. You should check it on an Android phone, an iPhone, a Nokia or a Windows OS phone, just to see what it looks like when people try to get it down onto a mobile device. Why are we checking in IE? And I'll put a link up. You should install. There's a package of IE so you can look at it in various versions of IE. Chances are, if you're not a web developer, you only have the most recent version of IE on your computer, or, you probably have some version of IE, but you need to have each of the versions because not everybody in the world updates consistently. In fact, right now, it's probably split evenly between the last 3 or 4 versions of IE. So you need to have all of those on there and check in all of those. Why do you have to do that? Well, as I said, IE has various bugs from IE6 to IE7 to IE8. All of these have various bugs in the way they interpret standard HTML. So design to the standard. Design to something that will work in a standards-based browser, and then you have to go back and tweak to make sure that there aren't any bugs coming up for IE. And so there's some pretty standard, I'll link out to some examples of this. There's some pretty standard things that go wrong with the IE browser. For example, we haven't talked a lot about collapsing margins, but when there's 2 elements with margins next to each other in the standard, they'll collapse, but on IE sometimes they won't. Sometimes it has trouble with floated elements, it disappears them. Sometimes there's other little spacing issues that sometimes you run into. And so there's no way to predict ahead of time what will go wrong. I don't, at least it may be that once you have experience in this particular area, you'll start to spot areas where you're gonna have a problem with various IE browsers. But generally speaking, you don't really know until you finish it and load it into a browser, and then you can look at it and say, uh-oh, this is spaced wrong, or oh, we're missing some part of the page. And then you have to go in and create a solution. There are a couple of solutions. One of the solutions is actually to load in a different style sheet for a certain version of Internet Explorer, and so you can use JavaScript to determine what kind of browser the user is using, and then send them to a different version of the CSS that will work just with that browser. That's one way. You can include little hacks in your CSS. For example, there's something called the star hack that works with 6, so that normal browsers, because it's a non-standard instruction, will just ignore it. But because IE is non-standard, it doesn't interpret that correctly either. And so it's a way of kind of using the bugs in IE against itself or for itself to solve itself. And that gets kind of detailed. I'll point to resources so that you can do this. I have always had to do this. I've never had a site where I've been done with it and it works in IE cleanly, in all versions of IE cleanly. So you have to build into your development cycle, and this is for your final project as well. I expect it to work in the major browsers. So, and I will test it in the major browsers. So you need to build into your development schedule a little bit of time at the end, hopefully only a little bit of time at the end, to make sure that it actually works in the different versions of IE especially, and then to do either sometimes a separate CSS file, and sometimes little hacks, little tweaks in your CSS that will only be seen by particular versions of IE. All right, so I'll call it to a close here. You'll need to take a look at some of those resources to kind of get into more depth. At a very basic level, you should take a shot at creating an alternate style sheet that allows you to print a site and have it look good, and at least be aware of the fact, install the different versions of IE and be aware of the fact that that pages are going to look different and maybe even be broken on versions of IE, even if they are valid and they work perfectly in Firefox and Opera and Safari. All right, I'll see you next time.